Welcome to the State Representative Candidate Debate, a 1996 election special. We are live here today. It's Sunday, October 27th, 1996, and we're here at the Channel 3 studios at Reading Memorial High School. My name is Karen Sawyer, and I'm here today as the moderator for this debate. I'm joined today, to my left is State Representative Republican incumbent Brad Jones, and to my right is Democratic challenger Chip Hines. And here to ask questions today is Mr. Paul Feely, who is the editor of the Reading Daily Times Chronicle. The format for the debate is as follows. Each candidate will be asked the same question. Each candidate will have a minute to respond to that question, and the candidate who received the question first will have an opportunity for 30-second rebuttal. For example, if I am to start by asking the first question, Mr. Feely will start by asking the first question to Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones will have 1 minute to answer that question. The same question will be asked of Mr. Hines, who will also have 1 minute to answer that same question. And then Mr. Jones will then in turn receive 30 seconds to rebut Mr. Hines' response. And then that sequence will be reversed. Mr. Hines, prior to the show, won a coin toss, so we're trying to decide who would receive the first question, and he deferred that first question to Mr. Jones. So Mr. Feely will ask the first question of Mr. Jones today. The other questions will come from you, folks at home in the viewing audience. And Mr. Feely will ask questions for the first 15 minutes of the debate, and then when you see the phone number for the studio flashed on your screen, please feel free to call in with questions. I'd like to give that phone number to you now, but it also will be flashed on the screen later on in the show. The phone number is 944-4175. Again, the phone number is 944-4175. There is someone in the studio to take your call, and then we will put your question on the air as soon as possible. I'd like to ask a couple things of you just to help us keep these proceedings moving, is to keep your question as brief and direct as possible. It must be a question that applies to both Mr. Jones and Mr. Hines, so the same question must be able to be asked to both candidates. And after you've asked the question, I will keep you on the line until the second candidate begins his response, and then I will hang up my end of the phone. So in case the second candidate needs that question repeated, I'll have you stay on the line until the second candidate begins his response. And with those format rules, we are ready to begin the debate. Mr. Feely, would you please begin these proceedings?
Sure. I'd just like to state these questions were put together by staff members of the Reading Daily Times Chronicle with help from the North Reading transcript and also readers that called into our message line with suggestions. So the first question to Mr. Jones is, how do you feel about the distribution formulas for local aid in general?
Well, I think they need to be looked at. I think over my tenure as state representative, my 3 towns of local aid has increased by $4.5 million. There's an interesting proposal right now for school aid from the League of Women Voters that needs to be looked at. And actually, I think in doing the calculations, each of the 3 communities I currently represent would receive a significant increase. I think we also have to look at, though, how that goes through all 351 cities and towns and decide, is it a formula that's based on enhancing the pie and putting more revenues in, or is it simply redistributing the money that's currently in there? One of the things I'm proud of is in my first few months as a state representative is we supported a co-sponsored amendment during the FY95 budget debate to phase out the lottery cap over a 5-year period, and we've seen the revenues from that come in. And we're almost back to the point where we were at the peak of local aid. We're right about there. Next year I think we'll pass it with adjustment for inflation. So I think we're on the right track, but we can still do more and we need to do more.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, and your time is up. Mr. Hines?
Well, I would agree with Mr. Jones on that. We can do more and we should do more. Local aid was down to a low level, and now it's finally starting to rise back up. And that is where I think we can make the difference for local aid. We need to work with the legislature, with the leadership, and try and get more local aid for Reading, North Reading, and North Andover, and increase it as best we can.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones, you have 30 seconds for
Well, I would simply state, is my experience as municipal official, I have a keen understanding of just how important it is. And while you've seen in municipal budgets its decline as a percentage of the overall budget, it's hovered around 10, 11, 12%, 13%, depending on the community. It's obviously a difficult political task if you simply redistribute the money that's already on the table. Therefore, what we have to do is look at different formulas and different programs and look at maybe some fairer playing field or equity questions and also increased revenues dedicated. And that's why I was very proud to have seen the phase out of the lottery cap when we're already on that vein.
Mr. Jones, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Feely, the second question, please, to Mr. Hines.
Mr. Hines, this has to do with the school building assistance issue. I'm told there are currently 122 projects that the sum total is about $500 million needed to pay for these. If federal funds are not infused, and there's a chance that that may happen, how will you make sure that state funds, how will you make sure that the state will fund these projects?
Well, it's my understanding that the State School Building Assistance Bureau was set up to help cities and towns with this function of building new buildings or renovating new buildings. And I would fight, whether or not there's federal funds or not, to keep funding the projects that need to be funded. And specifically, we need projects funded here in Reading, North Andover, and North Reading. So, you know, in essence, it doesn't matter whether the federal government gets involved or not. We still have to fund those projects, and we still have to get the towns onto those projects and provide a better education and a better quality environment for the kids.
Mr. Jones?
Yeah, there are, Paul, you are right. There's 122 projects waiting. We were able to add 31 in this year's budget for first-year funding. They're expecting to have another 50 projects come into the list, so it's a time when there's always been projects coming in, but you're going to see a huge number coming in. One of the things I think we have to look at is there's 3 different categories in the SBAB program. And the first category, obviously there's ones if there's a fire and a school burns down, that school district gets preferential treatment, obviously, because that's an emergency basis. But the next category is ones that are for racial equality, racial desegregation programs. And for instance, the city of Somerville has had every single school rebuilt with 90% reimbursement, yet they haven't had a redistricting program. They haven't added a school, they simply renovated and did schools like that. And that means suburban communities like North Reading, North Andover, and Reading are not getting their fair share. If that money, if they were all put in the same pool, more projects would be able to be funded faster. One of the positive things we also did in the legislature is we allowed for 5 years of interest payments without having to make principal payments, because we realize that it's taking time to get through the list.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Hines?
Yes, I would say that we would have to speed up the process as far as getting the money to the cities and towns. We can't have towns floating these loans and putting themselves possibly in a financial quagmire. So, yes, I agree. We need to speed up the process. That getting the money to the cities and towns to fund these projects is very important.
Okay. Mr. Jones, you have 30. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes. The third question, please, Mr. Feely. To Mr. Jones.
Mr. Jones, do you support the idea of a megaplex convention sports facility? And as a follow-up, would you use public funds to construct it?
I've voted on several occasions against that, other than looking at it as a study proposal. I think that we need to recognize we do need to make some additional convention space in the Commonwealth, not only for the tourism, but for the convention business. But I think we need the private sector to come forward and be willing to join us in a partnership and put their money on the table and say, what money are they willing to risk? Because they're going to be the first primary beneficiary of it. The state, in terms of employment, and in terms of tax revenues from it, are going to be the secondary beneficiary of it. So I'd only look at it if the private sector, the hotel, motel, restaurant industry, is willing to come forward and put their money where their mouth is.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hines.
Yeah, that's a common sense approach. I mean, the private sector is going to benefit from the megaplex, and I agree with Mr. Jones that, you know, they do have to step up. And I think the private sector is ready to step up. I mean, the Fleet Center is a perfect example of that, with private money being put up to build the Fleet Center. But, you know, the state government also has to be more accessible to private industry so that we can get the megaplex up and running, so that we can have an influx of tourism and therefore an influx in revenues.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones, you have 30 seconds.
I think with the megaplex, I mean, I'm happy Mr. Hines agrees with my position, but I also think that the private industry hasn't been as willing to step up to the plate. There's been talk of a shelf tax, which would kick in if revenues and things don't come forward, and they've been very resistant to that. I think they need to step up a little bit more and say, hey, if this is really something you want and it's something that is critical need, they have to be a little more forthcoming on this before the public sinks $500 million potentially into a convention center.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Feely, the fourth question, please, to Mr. Hines.
Mr. Hines, what are your thoughts about creating a casino in Massachusetts, which is an idea that has been proposed by the Wampanoag Indians?
Although the Wampanoag Indians have the right under federal law to have a casino, the problem is they have a right on their own tribal lands, which happens to be in Martha's Vineyard. I do not support them having a casino in New Bedford or Fall River. I do not support casino gambling at all.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones.
I've said on many occasions that I would only support casino gambling in one location if there was local approval, and New Bedford has that. I think we have an obligation as a society to recognize the treatment of Indians from historical perspectives, and we have to be a little deferential to them. But I've also said some very tough thresholds, which is what money is going to be reaped by the state has to go back to the cities and towns in the form of local aid. If we don't get those commitments, or if I don't get those commitments, under no circumstances am I going to vote for a casino in any part of the state. I also don't think we want to have a program that allows for them to go all over the state. I think if we're going to do one, we do it in one location and allow for a 5 or 6 or 7 year review period and look at what our experience is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Hines, 30 seconds.
I would just like to reiterate, although I recognize the federal law gives the Wampanoag Indians rights to have a casino, they have the rights to have it on their tribal lands, and I agree with that. If they want to have it on Martha's Vineyard, that's fine. But I do not support casino gambling in any form in this state.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hines. I just wanted to remind everybody in the viewing audience at home that you do have an opportunity to call in. This is a live show today, Sunday, October 27th only, and we do invite your phone calls at this time. The number is 944-4175. Let me repeat that number. The number is 944-4175, and I do ask that you keep, if you can put your question to the candidates as directly as possible, that would help these proceedings move along. So thank you very much. And for right now, I'd like to ask Mr. Feely to ask the 5th question of Mr. Jones.
Mr. Jones, this question would apply to all 3 towns in the district. All 3 towns face many building needs and problems, such as new elementary schools, police stations, and/or fire stations. What should the role of the state rep be in reconciling and coordinating these different needs?
Well, I think first and foremost, on the initial level, we have to make sure that local aid is held firm and increased across the board, because that's one avenue for support. One thing I've signed on to is the Public Safety Assistance Bureau, which is kind of a school building assistance program, but it takes some of the lessons we've learned from the school building assistance program, modifies them to allow. That would allow for police and fire stations to be built. In the town of North Andover, we're in the process right now of working to get a grant to renovate and expand their senior center. There's 8 applicants. We feel there's money for 6 programs. And if you look at North Andover, they have 4,100 seniors in their population right now, and they're building housing. So it's a population that's not going to decline. So there's a number of avenues that we can pursue to do that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Hines.
The role of the state representative in these proceedings is to meet with all the towns, assess their needs, and then become an advocate for their projects. If if North Andover needs a new senior area, or Reading needs a new police station, it's meeting with local leadership, discussing what options they would like to see, and then becoming an advocate in the state legislature for those projects, and in fighting for the money and fighting for the projects as best we can.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones, 30 seconds.
And I think the record will show that's exactly how I've conducted myself as state representative, in discussing with local officials or town managers what do they see their needs. It's up to the municipal officials, town meeting members, appointed committees to decide what the needs of that particular community are, how they want to structure their own community and how to meet those needs, and then for the state representative to interact, and that's what we've done in my office.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Feely, question 6, please, to Mr. Hines.
Mr. Hines, this following question was submitted by a staff member at the North Reading Transcript. North Reading has no municipal sewerage, which leaves homeowners entirely dependent on septic systems. The new Title V has caused substantial hardships for owners. What can be done to alleviate the burdens imposed by Title V?
The problem with Title V is it puts a ton of burden on the homeowner, and I believe that looking at tax breaks for these folks that have outrageous sewer bills and sewer construction